Okay, so then I would like to give a warm welcome to everyone who dialed in to our IDSA live session. And this live session sequel is called the Data Spaces Dialogue. And this is a sequel of webinars or live sessions, as we put it. And we want to, let all of you know about data spaces, the idea and concept behind, and the role for the European strategy for data and for business ecosystems, and the value which you can gain when adopting the idea of data spaces. So, and one thing is, and the focus will be on, well, what can be really done and how can it be done? So we put the name Design Principles for European Data Spaces on top of this, on this live session. I'm really happy that you're dialed in. Obviously, really a lot of people are joining, and I'm happy that our live sessions on data spaces are supported by the IDSA and our members, but also by the Commission, the European Commission, and it is performed jointly with the European project Open the Eye, which is like a discussion base on the issue of data spaces, and we hope to use this platform for discussion even more in the next weeks and months to come. So let me introduce a little bit what we are talking about, what we should talk about, what we should discuss about today, and what we have been discussing about in the last weeks and months since February, when the European Strategy for Data has been published. Well, the European Commission has laid down a strategic pathway to leverage data in the best possible way for the sake of European citizens and the digital single market. The data strategy and the white paper on artificial intelligence are the first pillar of this new digital strategy of the Commission. And the European data strategy creates the vision of a European data space, which adheres to the rules that are directly derived from fundamental European values. It envisages the flow of data within the EU and across sectors, and is based on the FAIR principles when it comes to the access, the management, and the use of data. Well, if I may put it like this, as the European data strategy is more a strategic outlook and an announcement defining the framework for future activities of the European Commission than a technological state-of-the-art description, it remains rather vague in its nature. So that is why we have this continuous process of consultation with the Commission, and we are really happy to contribute to this, and with the Data Spaces Dialogue. I hope we can really contribute a lot of content, opinions, and things to take away in the future. Well, the strategy for data mentions 9 key domains in which data spaces should be created, and it describes the availability of large pools of data and infrastructure to use, and appropriate governance mechanisms as key. Well, this framework and the concept of data spaces is based on the groundwork done by the International Data Spaces Association, IDSA, and our more than 120 members from 20 countries out of industry and research. We've done that throughout the last 5 years in a very consensual manner, and well, came up with some ideas and some clear documents, a reference architecture, and formal standards which can be reused by all of these data spaces mentioned. Well, among our members are large user companies from all sectors, from the automotive domain, from the energy domain, from banking, insurance, steel domain, so on, but also a lot of IoT players, a lot of IT providers, and a lot of SMEs with a lot of technological expertise, and the major research organizations all over Europe, and a lot of liaison partners all over the world. IDSA and what we provide aims at an open federated data ecosystem and marketplaces, ensuring data sovereignty of the creator of the data. The sequel of IDSA live sessions should make clear that IDSA is the starting point on data spaces, and that we have already achieved a lot of relevant results to build future data ecosystems upon. Well, it can be a starting point for the European data space and the concretely named 9 data spaces which are proposed by the European Commission. Well, we are more than happy to discuss this with all the global data sharing, data spaces, and data sovereignty community out there. We try to reach out through our live sessions and through other meetings and task forces to all known players in this field, and we hope to get via these live sessions in contact with new and old friends. And this is really the call for participation. So if you really want to talk about data spaces and data sovereignty, join us and via all the appointments, the events we provide, and let's really make the European data space and the European strategy for data happen. That is the core goal of what we're doing here. And well, that is why I am today more than pleased to announce two trailblazers for data sovereignty for many years now. And I'm really happy to discuss with Professor Dr. Boris Otto, Managing Director of the Fraunhofer Institute for Software and Systems Technology in Dortmund, and with Douwe Lycklama. He's the CEO and founder of INNOPAY, a company which makes digital transactions happen for decades already, and they are responsible for a lot of things which eased our lives and which created a lot of impact for business, especially in the payment sector, but even beyond, and more beyond, and more in the field of data sharing. So I'm really, really happy that today I have both of you on my screen, and we have the opportunity to discuss our joint issue, because it's a joint issue. We share the same insights on data sovereignty and for some time now, and we all share the insight that we really have to make the European strategy for data happen. And we all know that, well, a lot of things have already to be brought in place, and probably first of all, we have to create awareness for the issue of data sovereignty. And well, this is another occasion to do so. I'm really happy to do that jointly with you, and later on to discuss also with the audience on this issue. In order to, well, follow the schedule, I would ask Boris to start with his introductory presentation to, well, set the scene. Then I will hand over to Douwe to do the second part of it, and then we jump right into the discussion. So I'm happy, Boris, to listen to your words.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lars, for the kind introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity to share, well, some of our joint thinking here. As you rightly mentioned, the question which is on the table, how to build data spacing, is a very important one, and also an urgent one, right? because it has been fully understood that data is a source of economic prosperity and also societal wealth, which is also the reason why it's really a key strategic issue also for the European Commission, but also the member states, which led then in the end to the documentation in the European Strategy on Data. And as you said, I think it's important to address this issue together, and therefore the little presentation that I prepared is also, of course, something that, well, is a result of the observations and design activities that I personally did over the last years, but in particular also a result of the community that you mentioned rightly. And what I want to do in the next 10 minutes or so is get us again a same understanding, so on the same page about what a data space actually is. Because in order to respond to the question how to build one should understand what it is. Then I would like to give a brief example of how, let's say, data spaces embed themselves into a broader architecture, which refers to ecosystems and platforms. And then I also want to share some, as I said, some observations about key success factors that we need to address in order to be jointly successful in the end. So if we start with the first thing, well, what is actually a data space? Let us all be aware of the fact that a data space as a term mainly refers to a data integration concept. So this is very technical stuff and also not the sexiest stuff, let's say, on the table right now, but it's important to understand where it's coming from. So I listed here, as you can see on this slide, the key fundamental design principles which were laid out in the first seminal papers on data spaces that appeared 15 years ago. And they mainly refer to the fact that, let's say, no physical data integration is needed when we talk about a data space. So rather leave the data where it is, which also points to federated data architectures as we discuss them also, for example, within the Gaia X context. Then also no common schema is required. So we do not want to force all the data into one database schema, but rather achieve integration and, as a consequence of that, also interoperability on a semantic level. Then we do not require, let's say, one single source of truth, so to say. We allow for redundancies because the data is kept and stored also in a federated and a distributed fashion, right? And fourth, and which is really important, I believe, we foresee the possibility to have nested data spaces. So there are rooms in rooms, spaces in spaces, which is an important aspect which we see later on as well. What we did, as you rightly said, with the IDS initiative is to extend this fundamental design principles by two additional ones. And the first one is related to data sovereignty, but also to data traceability to a certain extent, because in order to be to trust in a data sharing scenario, I want to also oversee what happens to my data once I have shared it, right? And the next thing is that we also need to ensure trust in the sense that I really can rely on the fact that if somebody claims to be actor A or B, that he actually is that identity, right? And therefore we need to also cover the trust aspect through, for example, digital certificates or other tokens that we have in place. So a data space is a federated approach, a distributed approach for data integration. And with the IDS initiative, we add on another spice, so to say, to the sauce, which is basically data sovereignty and trust. So what does that actually mean when we look into the different domains? I believe 11 domains have been identified in the European Strategy on Data. And let's look to one example, which is taken from the mobility domain. We need to understand that in the end, we all together strive towards this layer in the architecture is depicted in light green. So we want to have more innovative end-to-end intermodal mobility services. That's what we all want to have. I personally, as a traveler, want to have, let's say, such kind of end-to-end mobility services. Also, we want to have more sophisticated traffic management solutions, right? So this is what's been going on this light green layer, which we can call a mobility ecosystem, which consists of various players. However, in order to make that happen, we need to understand that no single actor on the green layer has all the data by themselves, that is needed to make these innovative scenarios happen, right? Which is the reason why we are to create these common data spaces, as you can see here in the middle layer, so this blue-gray layer. And that is what we want to establish when we talk about a mobility data space. In the end, we want to create a shared digital twin about what's going on, so to say, in the mobility ecosystem. And now remember, a data space consists or relies on the idea to have a distributed data architecture. That means that we will have, let's say, endpoints from a software architecture point of view. In the IDS speech, we call them IDS connectors, which allow all the different actors to be part of the space, to be, let's say, a valid or certified player on the pitch, if you want to call it like that. So, and everybody basically brings their data resources to the table. However, in order to, let's say, allow for the distributed endpoints, the connectors, to find each other and to be interoperable, we need to have a couple of shared services in the middle, like the broker that we specified in the reference architecture model, like identity providers, but also like clearinghouses to track what's going on with data transactions. So if we talk about establishing or building a data space, it is addressing in particular, well, these three layers. And let me also outline one important aspect. Doing this is not a one-off traditional IT project, like I have a business and a technical design and then I give it to somebody who builds it, and 9 months from now we are done. If it goes well, we will never be done, right? Because it's continuously growing, because people enter the space, want to be part of it, and by entering, make it larger. That's the idea, right? So if we then look into the question, okay, I understand these three layers, and there might be 4 or 5, but let's assume it's about these 3 layers. Well, how to distribute the work? Well, who should do what, right? In this community which comes together to build data spaces. And this is depicted on the next view graph. Like, we need to have, let's say, this shared infrastructure services in place. And those are a very lean amount of services, a very limited number of services, like identity provisioning, like brokers, like making sure that stuff finds each other, right? And then we have in this gray area, in this blue-gray area, couple of things, commonalities, so to say, that we need to work on together. Like, if my standard example is, I mean, if we look into mobility and in particular e-mobility, there is a real world object to be defined, a business object, which is the charging point, which has not been existing like 10 years ago, right? And all the rental cars companies, the automotive manufacturers, the municipalities, also the public transport providers, they need to have a common understanding of what this charging point is and how it looks like. So we need to create a common understanding, a vocabulary on this gray area. And this is what we need to do together, right? So this is where we need to come together and work together. Otherwise, it wouldn't work, right? And then on the outer rim here, in the light green area, there is where the individual business models and, let's say, the use cases develop. And this is, let's say, what everybody has to do on its own, in my personal opinion, or in a consortium, right? So this is where, let's say, well, individual and, let's say, also competitive advantage comes into play. Whereas in this blue-gray area, as I said, we need together. And in the orange, the core of this onion, so to say, we can use what we have achieved together over the last years, which is basically the IDS infrastructure, if you want to call it like that. So if we move ahead and see that, of course, these data spaces are not just there, right? And so they usually evolve in certain stages. People start with bilateral data exchanges for what they in the end would not really need all the, let's say, shared services and our infrastructure as mentioned. But then they move towards, let's say, few-to-few interoperability, like closed communities. And there we also need like identification services, broker services in order to put things together. And what we envisage, of course, is the view graph that you can see on the right-hand side, which is basically an open ecosystem, an open data ecosystem where dynamically data providers and users come together. So in order to build this, and I don't want to go through the details of this table because it's relatively extensive, in order to achieve, let's say, data spaces on the topmost line item here, which is depicted in blue, we have learned over the past that we need to address a whole bunch of things to make that happen, right? In yellow, you can see a number of things that we need to take care of, let's say, in design time, if you want to call it like that. For example, defining an architecture, how such a data space looks like, and we did that with the IDS reference architecture model. If we want to have, let's say, many individual endpoints that can be part of the data space and get certified and do not want to have the one software vendor that does this, which is right, then we need to make sure that everybody commits themselves to the same rules of the game. So we need to have a certification scheme. And these things can only be there once. So please be aware that this cardinality also depicts, let's say, the distributed notion and nature of the entire thing. Then in orange, we have a couple of services that need to be offered, right? To, like, I have a connector, how can I get it certified, and where's the broker where it basically can self-describe itself and stuff like that in order to get things up and running. And then in green, we will have software business models, data services offered, like I will run your connector and I will make sure that I offer data provenance for you. Why? In order to, as I said, enable these blue ecosystems. And please be aware again also of the economic nature of these various things. So much of the stuff is low profit, because it's an infrastructure, like the Autobahn in Germany or the motorways in general, or the electricity network or the energy network. It needs to be there for individual business models to emerge and prosper. And it is not only an infrastructure as a technical point of view, it is an infrastructure from an economic point of view. And therefore, in order not to eat up too much of Douwe's time, I'd like to come to an end and share a couple of success factors with you in my point of view. So the question is always, okay, who pays for it? You know, it is an infrastructure. And let's look into how we pay or how other infrastructures are funded. I mean, if I look into, let's say, the Autobahn network in Germany, it's basically a public funding. And by the way, even the state is operating the Autobahn. I'm not sure whether that holds true for digital infrastructures, but it's one option, right? In Italy, it's the different case. It's operated by a private company, if I'm not mistaken. So what I envisage is that we will have a shared funding model, making use of both European Union funding sources, but also member states, and in particular also a combination of private and public funding. And that also leads to the question, well, how is it organized? It will probably like a PPP or something like that, right, in order to make these kind of things happen. So we also need to think of incentive system. You can be part of the data space only, for example, if you share some data, or you can expect to get data only if you share it. So quid pro quo. This is the logic of ecosystem. Everybody needs to contribute in order to gain, right? And then I'd like to stress out not every one of this, but a couple of other issues in terms of market adoption. I think we should make this a standard. And our ambition should be that, let's say, data sovereignty and cloud sovereignty based on IDS and also Gaia are the standard to make digital business in the European single market. So why not, right? Let's do it like that, because it's basically materializing what we find important, our values, when it comes to the use of data, right? And therefore, we should also drive this standard. We should use them. We should make them mandatory in public tenders. And as I said, we should enforce, foster the adoption through software, through services, and in ecosystem scenarios. And with that, I'd like to close my little contribution, and I'm really looking forward to first Douwe's presentation, but also for the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Well, thank you really very much, Boris, for this initial statement and overview of our agenda for obviously the next 7 years or so. I think that painted a really clear picture of what has to be done, but also that a lot of things are already in place. Let's discuss later on, and I would immediately like to hand over to Douwe. Please let us know your view on the world, and I'm happy to give the floor to you. Douwe, please.
Thank you, Lars, and thank you, Boris, for opening up the conversation. Let me first check whether my screen is showing with everybody. Yes, I think it's here. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Douwe Lycklama. I'm founder of INNOPAY. We started about 18 years ago in 2002, and as an engineer, I accidentally bumped into the financial world, in particular the world of transactions and the world of payments. Hence, the company is called INNOPAY. We are now with about 45 people, and we entered the world of transactions, but it started in payments back then. But I kind of discovered a whole new world. It was the beginning of digitization, and the whole thing which really grabbed my attention in the last 18 years is the concept of two-sided market, and how to innovate in two-sided market, and in particular how to innovate without a central player, without a centralized platform. So how to innovate in a decentralized way. And what I found is that the financial world, especially payments, is a very good example of decentralized digital innovations, because payments were also digitized in those days, and you had different banks, and yet you could go in any store and just pay electronically. And now in hindsight, I realized that such a way of acting, such an experience, is an act of data sharing. And in fact, it is an act of data sovereignty, because the only thing you do, you share data about your bank account under your control. You share it with the merchant, with the shop. And it's a tiny little amount of data, but it's super sovereign. And we also have data sovereignty providers called banks. We also have data sovereignty standardization. It's called MasterCard, it's called Girocard, Geldkaart. Yeah. In Netherlands, we have Ideal, which is for online payments. So this whole idea about data sovereignty is not that new, but we are doing it every day, actually, but we don't realize it. And this is a kind of growing epiphany over time, because 18 years ago, I could not frame the idea of data and data sovereignty in such a way, because I was only thinking about payment. So this whole journey, we also wrote in a book called Everything Transaction, and it's available in English and in Dutch. We gained the prize of the best management book last year, and it contains our journey in this two-sided market. And so it's and Boris promised me to read it soon, but because of Corona, the book hasn't arrived yet. The next slide I will show you it is about our journey, and it's this journey, because this whole idea of two-sided markets and innovation without a platform led us into the world of ecosystem, digital ecosystems, and in our last 15 years, we created as INNOPAY several of those digital ecosystems, not only in payment, but also in things like electronic invoicing, and also digital identity, public transport, electric mobility. Think about the charging points, data sharing for logistics, and lately data sharing in energy, but also data sharing generic, which I will explain later, more about cross-sectoral data sharing. And the common thread of all of this is that it's two times three things. The key features is threefold. It's decentralized data. It is an ecosystem which organizes in a way of cooperation in such a way that you can also compete with each other. So the competition is within the actors, but they all understand that there is there's a need to cooperate, because then you can create more value together. And the sum of all the participants and implementations is the de facto infrastructure. So the word infrastructure was already mentioned, but it is not a centralized infrastructure, it's decentralized. And the adoption of this whole thing creates a de facto infrastructure. And how to make these type of ecosystems? It starts in three phases. It starts with a vision and a leading coalition of willing, able, and acting. And that coalition creates the first MVP and organizes the governance. And then the next phase is towards infinity. It's about operating, growing, and keep on innovating. And that's also to Boris' point. It never stops. It is an organic thing. It's an ecosystem. And this can be regarded as a data space. Payments is a sort of data space, identity is a data space. All these applications you can see as different data spaces. And the task now is to make this more interoperable over time. Because infrastructures are extremely important for our health and wealth. And we are very, very used to infrastructures in the physical world. Think of roads, the Autobahn was already mentioned, but also sewage, electricity, water, and so on, also telecommunications, including payments. But then for the digital economy, something interesting happened, is that these infrastructures are basically fully privately owned. Whereas the previous infrastructures have a public and private component, which was also mentioned previously. And that is, the public component is important because it unites all the common interests of all of us, and it prevents rent-seeking monopolies on something which we all need. Because the characteristic of an infrastructure is that it is agnostic for its applications, it's agnostic for the type of actor. It can be used by everybody who can comply and who wants to comply to the rules of the infrastructure. But in the digital economy, we have the situation that the governance and is very much private, and the infrastructure is built upon collecting data and reusing that data and creating a position of power, and of course business success, because it's a tremendous business success. And to be fair, these services also have given us a lot of productivity and really, really great services. And the fact that we can have this webinar today is also a result of this. And I think that's all acknowledged. But we are now kind of in the kind of cornerstone or kind of pivotal moment of the digital economy to migrate from a more centralistic to a more decentralized way of running our infrastructure. And for that, we need data sovereignty. Data sovereignty is key missing link, and because the lack of data sovereignty has enabled the rise of centralized infrastructure. So the only thing we need to do to create a different digital economy is to install data sovereignty. What is data sovereignty? What is the definition we use? It is a definition which was coined by Boris years ago already. It's to be self-determining with regards to your data, and it's for individuals, but also for organizations. And it's about three key functionalities. It's about to know who holds your data and under what conditions have you ever given permissions to reuse your data. Second is that you have the ability to manage this consent, to change it or to revoke it. And the third is the ability to reuse or share your data. So your data in one place can be reused in another place, simply by giving access, not per se by copying all the data or to centralize all your data. But it's just about knowing where your data is and having the means, the tools to reshare this. So as you can imagine, there are business-to-business applications. There is business to consumer, and of course, consumer to government. And I will given time, I will not go very deep into this. I continue with saying here that there is a lot of interest in this, and there is a lot of urgency about the whole data, concentration of data, and a lot of political tailwind now, especially since 1 year ago, Gaia X was introduced. So the whole idea about sovereignty, digital sovereignty, cloud sovereignty, data sovereignty is something which is very high on the agenda. This is also another European politician who last year made a very true and very sharp statement about, yes, we have rights by GDPR, but we don't have the means. We miss functionality. We miss a common way of being able to really reshare our data. And this is again, we miss data sovereignty. We have the right to our data, but we have no way to do this. Here's another person, Tim Berners-Lee, who wants to also put more control on data. And even Jack Dorsey from Ripple is researching whether Twitter should move from being a platform to more protocol, so that there could be multiple Twitter players, but who are interoperable, very much like how GSM is interoperable. We can be part of a different telecom provider and still call each other. But if you want to use a digital version like digital communication like WhatsApp, it's not possible. You first have to agree that both parties have to be with WhatsApp. You cannot just exchange your number and then call each other. So then in Europe, this topic is heating up because we are about decentralization, we are about federated, we are about fragmentation, and it's not a bug, but it's a feature. And so we are very happy with the European data strategy, how it was laid out in February. And there is a big place for data sovereignty and the whole concept of data spaces. And I like the word very much. And the way we look at it is that there will be several data spaces, but they will be glued together by doing things in a common way, to be standardized in things what you can standardize, because you cannot standardize everything within a data space, because some things are very much space agnostic, like logistics is for some things very different from farming, for example, because of the data formats and the usage. But other things like the security and the trust can be very much the same. So there is room to connect and to interoperate an ecosystem of data spaces, and that's exactly the vision which is also laid out by IDS and the whole architecture surrounding it. So the sum of all the interoperable implementations of the data holders, which is the companies and governments, is what we call here the soft infrastructure, because it's invisible, but it's really foundational for decentralizing our digital economy. In the Netherlands, we have a government vision. It was published in February 2019, which is all about data sovereignty. And it's about the principles we laid out here. And the underlying view of looking at this is that we are missing a kind of exchange domain. We are missing a kind of infrastructure in which it's very easy to exchange data. Just as easy as it would be as dialing and making a telephone call or sending an email, which is of course a kind of way of working which we all adopted globally. But for structured data sharing, that is still lacking. So the way we look at this this matter is that there is a need for an access domain, a kind of exchange domain, infrastructure domain, and that domain is built out of nine building blocks, which is a set of topics which every data sharing initiative and even also platforms use and implement today. Even without all this talk about digital sovereignty, if you want to run a data sharing platform or ecosystem, you need to cover all these type of topics which we mention here. And the cabinet vision is built around this idea of these 9 topics, and the hypothesis is if we would harmonize these 9 topics over all the data sharing initiatives, you effectively build a soft infrastructure or a data exchange domain. And that idea was the basis of a collaboration which was started early this year after 1 year of preparation. It's called the Data Sharing Coalition, where existing initiatives, so parties who are already sharing data of different sectors, came together and acknowledged the fact that there is interest and attractivity to create cross-sectoral data sharing, and that every data sharing initiative can learn from each other. So it is a very much bottom-up approach, which leads to a more structuring of things which most parties already do. And that is the Data Sharing Coalition, which focuses on seamless cross-sectoral data sharing based on data sovereignty. Here you see some logos of parties who have joined this, and we are very, very happy that also IDSA is part of this, because we share the same vision. And IDSA, we can reuse and adopt a lot of the things, of the thinking work which has already been put into data in IDSA, because the architecture is extremely generic and has all the features of an infrastructure already. So we are very, very happy with that. And here you see the vision is to create a interoperable network of cross-sectoral data sharing initiatives. And in a couple of years, so we still have a lot of work to do. And it starts with what we call the harmonization canvas. So today we are in the phase that all these initiatives are working together based on use cases to define what can we harmonize and what can we reuse, and in such a way that it becomes easier to exchange between sectors, but also for new initiatives to get going, because you don't need to invent everything yourself anymore. Here you see the various type of roles in these initiatives. The core is the nucleus is existing data sharing initiatives. So it's not per se existing parties, but it's the initiatives who represent multiple parties. Then there is, of course, industry associations, there are knowledge institutions, there are also data providers and vendors, service providers basically, who have to adopt and who will adopt and who have an interest and underwrite the whole idea. because they will make sure that when you have a standardized implementation, that de facto this infrastructure will be there. Extremely important when working with ecosystem is having governance, and to make very clear and agree upon who makes decisions, how are decisions being made, and how and what happens if decisions cannot be made, and how do you come to agreement, and how do you involve the world around you, because you cannot, of course, have everybody sitting at the table. So designing governance in order to have fast and smooth decision making is a very critical success factor, and of course we have a lot of practical experience with that. What is also important of such initiatives, that it's open so that everyone can participate, and there are different levels of participation, and because the adoption and the explanation is the communication on this is again a critical success factor, because there is a big difference in the readiness of parties and people to embark on such things. So that's why we have designed it in such a way that there are very low thresholds. This brings me to my last slide. It is about the coming period ahead. So today we are in a very critical phase at the moment. Because a lot of legislation is kind of on the drawing table, and there are consultations happening, and I would definitely encourage you to participate there as well. And I think what is needed is that we need to try to simplify the message to the people who make legislation, because we strongly believe that if we could unite everybody around the topic of data sovereignty, and at the same time describe what it is and be very clear about that, and also what it is not, then connect to that the idea of the soft infrastructure, and the fact that adoption of a common way of working leads to an infrastructure and to a standardization. And the third element is that adoption is key, and adoption is about communication, it's about awareness, it's about bringing to the world that there is a different paradigm also. That centralized platforms is not the only thing, but there is also a decentralized way of doing things, in which platforms have a great role to play. So it's not against platform, but it is making platforms interoperable, which we see as a way forward, and that is a strong driver of this adoption. So thank you for your attention, and I look very much forward to continuing the conversation. Lars, over to you.
Yeah, Douwe, thank you so much for your more than comprehensive input and overview. And this is, as mentioned, the perfect fit to what Boris presented, and well, it's for a good reason that we are so close and now driving the issue of data sovereignty together. I really like the idea of data sovereignty now, and we should really merge the activities of these live sessions and your idea there. So we already discussed about that. Okay, well, I was always thinking that the researcher or professor talks longer, but now I learned that obviously the book author and consultant didn't stick to the agenda. So anyway, it's a learning. But I think it was all of really great value, and it is fine. So I assume that the questions from my side couldn't have been better than listening to both your presentations. So I tried to catch up with the chat, and I'm really happy that we received several questions, and I also prepared questions on my own, so I try to bring this together. Well, one aspect I would like to raise is probably, well, how can companies start? what is up for them to do. So, well, which capabilities have they to build up? And what I see is from the presentation from both of you is that we obviously see a new kind of economy, so we call it the data economy, and obviously the business mechanics are different, and we have to learn things. We have to perhaps think about new incentive models, we have to think about new infrastructure, soft infrastructure, and so on. But it's also about creating awareness, and I really like the term from the chat. Thanks a lot, Sandro. We have to come up with a data space culture. So the concrete question, so what do enterprises have to do? Which capabilities have they to set up, and perhaps which tools have they to bring into place in order to really make happen what both of you presented? So perhaps Boris in the first view.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's also a very timely one, because I mean, what I see is that many companies are in the situation where they are thinking about how to move to the cloud, or are already in the progress of moving to the cloud. And of course, cloud computing is nothing new. We have it since the 90s or so. But what we see right now is that, let's say, the majority of the value creation processes are moved to the cloud. So, and if I'm in this transition, what I would have to do anyway is think of, well, how does the cloud platform, the data platform, looks like, right? And what I would suggest everybody who is in this progress to think data sovereignty by design for these cloud data platforms. Because, as also mentioned by Douwe, it is a fair hypothesis, I guess, that in the future we will be confronted with more requirements for data sovereignty and trust. So then build it in by design. And to be a bit technical, I mean, all the data platforms, the majority is making use of microservices and container technology. And what we have proposed with the IDS architecture is exactly something that fits nicely in there. So with every container that you basically design and deploy on your cloud platform, make it data sovereignty by design. That would be my approach to, let's say, well, use the chance of moving into the cloud and do it right. Of course, there are more responses to the question, but I think this is one of the most important points to that. Yeah.
I think we got the point. Thank you very much, Boris. Well, then a second portion of the questions moves towards the direction. Okay, we share that idea and that vision. I really like the comments. So obviously there are some other organizations and people to team up with. We will do afterwards. I'm really happy to do that. So Douwe, okay, there are obviously people out there, so people and friends joining us, and on the other hand side, the Commission to do something. What shall all of us do to really make that happen? What are action items next year?
Yeah, I think the shortest is to agree on the whole idea of, okay, we are missing this functionality to control our data. So we miss the tools, the standards for this data sovereignty. So declare that as something that every data point in Europe has to be data sovereign somehow, somewhere. We have to put that somewhere. And at the same time, explain what it is, but that can be done. I mean, a lot of work has been done altogether, and then stimulate the actors in the market to make this happen, because we have so much intelligence around us in Europe to just fix this, and fix it in such a way that the public interest is safeguarded. But what you should avoid is building again a lot of institutions and a lot of decision making. And I'm a strong believer in in bringing it decentralized as possible. So bring it to the data spaces, bring it to the people who really have the use cases and who want to create value with data sharing. That is our biggest pitfall, is to make it too much top down. Whereas the only thing top down we need to do is define the principles and define the criteria to which initiatives need to comply with. So, yeah. And we can start today. It's not difficult because there are enough use cases. And yeah, well, you know.
Yeah, well, we really start today, so the chat explodes. So another question. We already mentioned that there are domain-specific data space endeavors out there already running. How can they be harmonized? How can they be made interoperable? So I think we gave some ideas on this. So the concrete question, that there may be an agricultural data space or one in the building domain. Okay, what to do now? So the first, I would like to mention again the coordinating and support action on European level, Open DEI, Open DEI. So, this is a coordinating action which is financed also by the Commission to harmonize things in different sectors, not in all sectors, in 4 dedicated ones, among them agriculture. And we heard about the data sharing coalition in the Netherlands, which is a great initiative. So what we are currently doing is see how we match those harmonization efforts. So we are doing that. So Boris and Douwe, they are key persons in both of these activities, and we merge that. So you may approach both organizations. We will help you. We will like to integrate you. And then we can see, okay, what are your special requirements in your domain, and what has to be harmonized according to what both of the colleagues said. And there was another question which is more on, standardization efforts. So there are also standards on the digital twin. So not only in the manufacturing domain, but also in the building domain. And we do have the STEP standard out there. So perhaps a short answer from Boris. There are any similar ideas probably. How will this be matched with what we're doing?
Well, I think in terms of bringing everything together and what is, let's say, the common denominator of all, I believe, and that is in line with what Douwe also said, in the end, I believe the things that we need to agree on in terms of the data infrastructure are not so many. So I think it's really a small set of standards that we need to adhere to. And that is good news because that is manageable and achievable. However, we also need to agree on that, right? So if we want to have this digital infrastructure to be fostering interoperability across domains and in domains, we need to agree on that. That's the point. And I think we have achieved a lot. So it's realistic, right? The other thing in terms of the digital twin, right? We see more and more blurring of traditional sectors, which is also why we do not speak so much about the automotive industry, but rather about, let's say, mobility. And again, I mean, this charging point is a good example because it didn't exist 15 years ago. And actors from different sectors need to work together and create a common, understanding and a common semantic information model of these, let's say, master data or key data objects that are used in common. However, I believe that this is also easier than 20 years ago. We have vocabularies, we have, let's say, relatively mature semantic technologies, and we can do that together. And I believe that also in that regard, it is a doable task. However, we should start doing it and not talking about it, right? That's true.
Okay, so obviously our joint insight is let's do it. So we reached 12 o'clock, and it's really a pity. So next time we should take 2 hours. For this time, perhaps Douwe, a last word. The Commission is listening. 2 sentences. What are your wishes for the next months to come?
Three things. Make data sovereignty the leading principle, and keep the law and the regulation short. Make it shorter and say data sovereignty, and then explain what it is. Secondly, popularize the idea of the ecosystem and the network, the decentralization, so the soft infrastructure, the interoperable data spaces. And thirdly, adoption, because we need to convey that there is an alternative, and also the benefits of acting now, and reach the people who really have a benefit to do something now, because the rest will follow. That's always with these types of things. So,
yeah,
that's very simple. Just get going.
Yeah, so it's simple, and well, I like your quote from Ms. Vestager. Well, we have rights, but no means. Obviously, we do have means at our hands, and we just have to let everyone know, and let's really make data sovereignty happen. Douwe and Boris, thank you so much for participating, and I'm really looking forward to a lot of conversations like this with you, and especially for driving data sovereignty and in the future together with you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for everyone attending, for the great questions, and well, stay in touch with us. I'm looking forward to that. And well, have a good day, stay healthy, and goodbye.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.